Yeah, one thing I should ask you again, I'm recording this. So, and then I would like to publish the recording on our YouTube channel. So I want to ask you for like formal permission to do that. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, great.
No problem.
Okay, good. So let's put everybody on mute, and if you like to start, would be great.
Okay.
Welcome, and thank you so much for talking to us here. You've spent all your life in very, very important diplomatic positions, including I've seen the Kyoto global climate change agreement, and also, of course, at the UN. So it's very interesting to hear your inside view about how the international organizations deal with the various crises we have here now, unfortunately. Thank you, and looking forward to your talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gerhard, and good evening, everyone. I would like to put on my PowerPoint. Can you see it? Gerhard, it's all right?
Yes, it's perfect, perfect. Thank you so much, and looking forward.
Thank you. It's my great pleasure to talk about the United Nations and the important question of whether the United Nations has been doing a good job or a poor job, particularly with respect to the war in Ukraine and other global challenges, including, of course, climate change and other things. Let me first of all talk about positive sort of elements of the work of the United Nations in recent years. There are certain number of achievements which I'm sure that you agree with, like MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, for the period the year 2000 up until 2015. And from 2015, we are now working on the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. They are the goals agreed upon by all members of the United Nations. Climate change, Paris Agreement was reached in 2015, and everyone is now working on the basis of that Paris Agreement. Kyoto Conference came up with the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. And that protocol had a lot of problems and failures, which I would like to talk about later. The Nobel Peace Prize was given to WFP, World Food Program. I think World Food Program is one of the best United Nations organizations, particularly organizations which have been working in the field, operational organization. WHO, World Health Organization, has been getting some criticism, but it has also working hard on COVID-19, polio eradication, leprosy elimination, Ebola, etc. Treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons was agreed upon, although Japan is not the party to that treaty, as you know. The Black Sea Grain Export Initiative was masterminded by the United Nations and Turkey for the exports of grain from Russia and Ukraine last year. Now, the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, had 8 important goals, including poverty reduction. It has that goal of halving poverty in the world was achieved during the period 2000-2015, thanks largely to economic developments in China and India. Now we are working on sustainable development goals. The 17 goals and 169 targets. Compared with the MDGs, I believe that the SDGs, in particular in a country like Japan, have been promoted and people are taking those goals more seriously. Because MDGs were largely related to developing countries, to poverty reduction and child poverty, maternal health, and so on. But SDGs deal with all sorts of issues, including, of course, climate change and traffic problems in big cities and energy and all things. And all countries in the world are expected to take some action to achieve these goals by 2030. Now, the United Nations has been working on humanitarian aid, and this shows the overview of the global humanitarian problem. People in need amount to 339 million people. People targeted by UN humanitarian aid agencies are 230 million people. And the required finance will be just about $51 billion. There have been a lot of appeals, and the humanitarian aid has been carried out by operational agencies like WFP, World Food Program, UNICEF, or UNHCR, High Commissioner for Refugees, or UN Population Fund. Now, one of the most important achievements, so people thought, in 2005 for the UN was the R2P. Have you heard about R2P? Responsibility to protect. The agreement was, first, the responsibility was recognized for state to protect its population from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. But many countries, particularly in Africa, would not be able to protect their own people because of internal strife and problems and all that. So it comes to international community. It's a responsibility to assist those states to meet the obligations. But if the government is not willing to do that with the help of the international community, then it is a responsibility of international community to respond collectively in a timely and decisive manner under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. Chapter 7 is about economic and military sanctions by member states of the United Nations. So, if any country, any government, or dictators, if they don't protect their own people from genocide or war crimes and so on, international community has got to respond to the situation by way of economic and military sanctions or other means. That was a big decision taken in 2005 at the summit meeting of the UN. And what happened? You remember in 2011, there was the so-called the Spring of the Arab. First, Ben Ali, the far left of the pictures, of Tunisia, was ousted in 2011, followed by Mubarak in that year, 2011, and then Gaddafi, Colonel Gaddafi of Libya in 2011. Those three dictators, so to say, were ousted by the Spring of Arab in 2011. And at the time of the internal the conflict in Libya, UN Security Council came up with the Resolution 1973, historic resolution, giving the authority to member states to take all necessary measures. That's euphemism for military action. So UN Security Council authorized the member states to take military action against Gaddafi. Gaddafi was going to win the war, the internal war in Libya. But because of this resolution, NATO helped the other side of the forces in Libya, and in the end, Gaddafi was caught and he was killed, as you remember. But then, at that time, I was working inside the United Nations Secretariat, and we were in a sort of the happiest moment of the time, celebrating the demise of dictators. We thought that dictators would never be able to sleep on the bed peacefully. Alas, R2P stopped there as the Arab Spring spread into Syria. And Bashar Assad of Syria was held by Russia because the UN Security Council could not agree on that sort of resolution anymore. Russia vetoed the series of UN Security Council resolution on Syria. So Assad has been helped by Russia, Mr. Putin. In the case of Yemen, the sort of a dictator, Saleh, was ousted. He actually had to resign in the year 2012. But alas, the political triumph of the United Nations in agreeing upon the R2P, responsibility to protect, has been stalled because of the veto powers of Russia and also by China's veto at the Security Council. In the case of China, it is about Kim Jong-un of North Korea. He has been helped by China and no Security Council sanctions, military sanctions have been agreed upon against North Korea as well as against Syria. Now, let's talk about the grain war, which started on the 24th of February last year. There are 3 or 4 elements, important pillars of the activities of the UN. You may think that the UN has not been working well with respect to the war in Ukraine. A lot of people say that the UN is powerless, incapacitated, or impotent. So they say. But it's too early to say that the United Nations is not doing anything. because UN Secretary General has been one of the actors of the UN. So is the UN General Assembly and the Security Council. There are a lot of humanitarian assistance activities and International Court of Justice, ICJ, and ICC, International Criminal Court, has also been important actors with respect to the war in Ukraine. Security Council has not been working well. Right, that's true. But the Security Council is not all about the United Nations. When the Security Council cannot work, other bodies and organs of the United Nations will have been working to cope with the problems in Ukraine. Let me tell what they have been doing. Secretary General said at the very beginning that the Russian activities in two regions in Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and the follow-up military invasion in February, they were inconsistent with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. I was told that the secret document says that Mr. Antonio Guterres was kind to Russia, but as far as this war is concerned, Antonio Guterres was quite clear from the beginning, too honest and too clear about the position of the United Nations. He said that the war in Ukraine was illegal, right? But I tell you that there are a lot of ways of describing any doubtful actions by member states with respect to the Charter of the United Nations. You can say that the war was not in conformity with the UN Charter. It means that the war was not white, right? Was not white. If you say white is legal and black is illegal, there is a huge area between white and black. If you say the war was not white, it can be taken as if the war could have been black, illegal, or gray, in between legal and illegal. But if you say the war was illegal, you are saying that it was black with the charter. And then there is no way of interpreting the situation that it could be gray, right? If you say it's black, it means it's black. But if you say it's not white, it could be black or gray. And this is not a play of words, because when Kofi Annan was asked about the second Iraq war by the BBC news agency, he said that, yes, well, the question was the war in Iraq was illegal. He said, yes, if you wish. I have indicated it was not in conformity with the UN Charter from our point of view. This is the authentic way of answering the question, as legal advisor would advise him to say that. The war in Iraq was not white, but it could have been interpreted as gray. Japan wanted to interpret the war as a gray zone measure. But Mr. Kofi Annan added that from the point of view, it was illegal. He admitted that it was black. And all of a sudden, the White House and Washington just got all the surprising the announcement from the United Nations. They got so angry, and the relationship between the United States and the UN became so sour. That was a wrong answer from the point of view of the legal advisor of the United Nations. Mr. Ban Ki-moon was also asked quite often by a journalist whether it was illegal or legal, but he did not answer the question directly. But from that point of view, in the history of the Iraq War, Mr. Antonio Guterres, from the very beginning, has been saying that the war in Ukraine was black, illegal, with the UN Charter. He has been cautioning the world by saying our world is in big trouble, including the war in Ukraine, the climate crisis, global food and energy crisis, SDGs, and conflicts in Myanmar and the Middle East. We are in big trouble. And he has also been saying that as far as the war in Ukraine, there is no chance for serious peace negotiations yet. He doesn't see that the time has come for a serious peace negotiation. As he has been telling quite honestly that the war was illegal, I think that he lost the chance of becoming a mediator, and Russia would not trust him. Antonio Guterres was on the side of the West as far as this war is concerned. And he has been saying that the peace negotiations time has not come yet. He believes that perhaps Ukraine has got to regain some of the territories taken by Russia. And when the time comes, then negotiations could be started. But right now, it will be advantageous for Russia to stop the war at this right moment. UN chief fears that the world is headed for wider war over Ukraine, Russia. I fear the world is not sleepwalking into a wider war. I fear it is doing so with eyes wide open. But there have been some critical views about the role of the UN Secretary General. He was late in visiting Ukraine. The hundreds of former staff of the UN urged him to go to Ukraine and all that. But the Secretary General role is indeed limited. He can say many things, but he does not have any police force or military forces to back up whatever he says. Macron, visiting China recently, said that he would count on Xi Jinping to bring Russia to senses. I don't know how serious he was, but Chinese premier went to Russia recently, and China may have some sort of power or influence over Mr. Putin, but China is also cautious about whatever she does because China does not want to get, say, trapped by the United States for overdoing for the interest of Russia. Now, so far, it was the Secretary General of the United Nations. The power of the Secretary General is limited. Now, let's talk about UN Security Council. UN Security Council discussed the resolution in February last year, immediately after the war started. And the resolution demanding Moscow to immediately stop its attack on Ukraine and withdraw all troops. But this resolution was blocked by a veto of Russia. In September last year, too, Security Council had the draft resolution condemning attempted annexation of Ukraine region, but that resolution was also blocked by a veto of Russia. Vetoes have been cast at the UN Security Council by not only Russia, but by the United States, UK, France, and China. But as you see, in recent years, the use of vetoes by Russia has been quite numerous regarding the war in Ukraine and sanctions against North Korea as well. As you know, the number of UN member states, is currently 193. But it started with 51 members in 1945, with 11 members at the Security Council. The number of UN members has increased to 193 right now, but the number of the members of the Security Council has only increased from 11 to 15, currently only 15, including 5 permanent members of the Security Council: US, Russia, China, France, and the UK. Now, I'll not go into the details, but there have been lots of, say, attempts to reform the Security Council. G4, Group of 4, that is Brazil, Germany, India, and Japan, want to have seats as permanent members of the Security Council. African Union also wants to have some permanent members and non-permanent members, while Caribbean community or other developing countries, or countries like Italy, Korea, Mexico, do not want to have any more permanent members because they cannot become permanent members. They would like to block Japan or India to become permanent members of the Security Council. So because of the disagreements among member states, Security Council reform has been stalled and no progress has been made. But there have been some proposals, elders, formulated by Mr. Richard Branson and his friend, Peter somebody, the entrepreneur, asked the Nelson Mandela to form the former important people, like Mary Robinson of Ireland, former president of Ireland, or Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the UN, or Jimmy Carter, former president of the United States, or Desmond Tutu of South Africa. And they formulated the group called the Elders, and still the Elders. Currently, Mary Robinson, I believe, is the leader. Nelson Mandela has gone. Mr. Carter is still alive, right? But Kofi Annan has gone. But they propose that let the states which aspire to permanent membership accept instead, at least for the time being, election to a new category of membership, which would give them a much longer term than the 2 years served by the non-permanent members. And so-called, some people call it business seat in the Security Council. Japan, India, Brazil, and Germany want to have the first seat for them. But it's too much to ask for the first seat. And so why can't you be content with getting the business seats? Reform of the Security Council has been discussed, and the scholar like Professor Kitaoka of Tokyo University, emeritus professor, proposed the same thing as the elders did. Why not Model B, the business class solution, rather than Model A, the first class solution? There have been some discussions that the UN Security Council might be able to be more effective if Article 27, Item 3 of the Charter is seriously acted upon. Article 23, Item 3 says that in the case of the negotiations for peaceful solution of the conflicts, the parties to a dispute must abstain from voting. No veto power. But as regards Chapter 7, the military and economic sanctions, the obligation does not apply. And so far, the member states of the Security Council have understood that when the Security Council talks about the resolution concerning sanctions, particularly military sanctions, then they will be able to use their vetoes. But there could be some interpretation saying that the country like Russia, in the resolution regarding this war in Ukraine, may have to abstain, should not use its veto, using this on the basis of this Article 27. But alas, the current practice is considered that it doesn't apply to the current work of the Security Council with regard to the war in Ukraine. Now, that was the role of the UN Security Council. Now, let's talk about the UN General Assembly rather briefly. The UN General Assembly has been working quite well, in a way tirelessly, to work out resolutions concerning Russian offensive in Ukraine. First, March the 2nd in 2012, they came up with the resolution Two, a demand the Russia to immediately end its military operations. And this was agreed upon by 141 countries in favor of this resolution, with only 5 members, Belarus, North Korea, Eritrea, Syria, and Russia, against the resolution. 35 abstained, including China and India. Now, UN General Assembly had also came up with a resolution to suspend Russia in the Human Rights Council in April 2012. But the countries which supported this resolution was less than the first resolution, 141. But this time it was 93 countries in favor and 24 against. 58 abstained. UN resolution demanding Russia to reverse attempted annexation of 4 regional states in Ukraine in October 2022 was also agreed upon. 143 member states in favor and 5 against, and 35 abstained. Abstained countries included China, India, and Thailand, Vietnam also. General Assembly also came up with a resolution in February this year calling for immediate end to war in Ukraine, and 141 countries again were in favor. 7 were against, and 32 abstained. Again, abstained countries included China and India. Now, General Assembly also adopted a landmark resolution aimed at holding 5 permanent members of the Security Council accountable for the use of veto. When they use veto in the UN Security Council, they are now asked to explain why they had used the veto. And although we thought that China and Russia would not comply with this resolution of the General Assembly, but they did in June 2022 with regard to the resolution of North Korea. And China, Russia blasted the United States over North Korea, saying that because of the United States, they had to exercise the veto power. Now, so far, the role of the Security Council, limited, but there is a Security Council and the General Assembly, sorry. And in the case of the UN General Assembly, you may agree with me that UN General Assembly has came up with a number of resolutions. But resolutions are resolutions, words, not military sanctions or economic sanctions and so on. Now, humanitarian aid by the United Nations include the grain exports deal with Russia and Ukraine. This deal was masterminded by the United Nations in collaboration with Turkey last year. And this agreement was extended this March this year, for another days to come. The end period is not specifically set. As you know, the recent development includes the announcement by Russia to put nuclear weapons. This tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, near NATO borders, near Poland. And their explanation is that NATO has been deploying nuclear weapons in NATO countries. Why not Russia in Belarus? Now, recently on March the 17th, International Criminal Court announced that the arrest warrants were issued by the ICC against Vladimir Putin and Maria Alexeyevna, Belova, for the abduction or transfer of population children from occupied areas of Ukraine to Russia. If you are interested in, I would be happy to talk about the possibility, possible scenarios of Mr. Putin to be arrested. I believe that this was a very important step, although many people say don't take it seriously. But Mr. Putin has got to be worried. He has got to be cautious, otherwise he may be arrested or transferred to The Hague for the International Criminal Court. If you are interested in, let's talk about it later. Now, changing the subject from the war in Ukraine to other activities of the United Nations, I first like to talk about this climate change and the United Nations. I was indeed one of the negotiators at the Kyoto Conference in 1997. It was a memorable conference, a terrible conference of negotiation, day and night, and night sessions after night sessions, from December the 1st till December the 10th. And on December the 8th, Mr. Al Gore, then Vice President of the United States, came, and he changed the whole atmosphere of negotiation. So far, the negotiation did not go that far, but he said on December the 8th, Al Gore said that after talking with our negotiators this morning, and after speaking with the speaking on the telephone from here with President Clinton short time ago, I am instructing our delegation right now to show increased negotiating flexibility. I mean, this is some abstract words. He's saying that I told my delegation to be flexible. But this word was like a time bomb. It exploded. And the US delegation in Kyoto became all of a sudden flexible. They were saying that they would not be able to agree on minus target for the reduction of greenhouse gases, but they said, why not? -3, -4, -5. Eventually, we agreed that Japan to reduce greenhouse gases by 6%, -6, US -7, EU -8, while Russia and New Zealand were 0%. There were some flaws in the end, when I come to think of it, about the Kyoto Protocol, hasty agreements on new ideas like greenhouse gases, 6 greenhouse gases, think the CO2s to be absorbed by trees and leaves, emission trading, and clean development mechanism. New sort of agreements were agreed upon hastily. An inflexible approach to legally binding emission reductions. It was legally binding, so it was difficult to agree upon. Legally binding targets mean that you get penalty if you do not comply with the agreements. While developing countries had no obligation whatsoever to reduce greenhouse gases. Paris Agreement in 2015. This agreement was legally a binding agreement, but targets to reduce greenhouse gases were not legally binding. You may call best efforts agreement. So if India, China, America, European Union, Japan would not be able to agree, would not be able to achieve the targets they agreed upon, they announced, they would not be punished because there is no mechanism of compliance. They are best efforts agreement. So it was rather easy that you agree to reduce your CO2s and greenhouse gases and all that by 2050. I mean, by then you would be dead or you are not there. And you would agree upon it. And even if you can't achieve the target, you are free. You will not get any penalty for that. Now, there have been alarm warning from the IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change, recently saying that we are not on the track to achieve the target of keeping the level of temperature at 1.5 centigrade above the level before the Industrial Revolution. It will go up to 3.2 by the end of this century if we do not make further efforts. Now, finally, views about the world, views of the world about the United Nations. The United Nations are too much on its plate. Indeed, the mounting problems are coming to the UN for solutions. Climate change, natural disasters, organized crime, and whatever, on top of political problems like Ukraine war, Myanmar, Yemen, and many others. Now, the war in Ukraine highlights the UN's impotence. So, the newspaper Le Monde wrote in June last year. However, according to the Pew Research Center, international views of the UN are mostly positive. If you look at Canada, 66% of the people polled said that they were favorable about the work of the UN. United States too, 61%. But the countries, 3 countries, are noticeable that very low level of favorability of the United Nations. They are Greece because of Cyprus problem, Israel because of the Palestinian issue, and Japan. People wonder why Japan has got this little support for the UN. You may be able to help me why Japan's favorability of the UN is so low. Is the UN doing a good job or a poor job? This is only about Americans. Gallup research opinion poll says that now in 2023, 39% of the people polled said that they think that the UN is doing a good job. But in 2023, 58% of Americans said that the UN was doing a poor job. In 2002, the UN has got 58% of Americans saying the UN was doing a good job. It was at the time of the first Iraq War. And immediately, several years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. When the UN is working together with the US, when the US is working with the UN, the popularity will go up. But in the second Iraqi war, the Kofi Annan said that the war was illegal, then the popularity dropped drastically. Now, how we will be able to work for the better functioning of the UN? Antonio Guterres, Secretary General, said that we must do everything possible to avert the great fracture between the United States and China. The world is divided between two worlds. One, the America and the West, and the other, China and other authoritarian regimes. The New World Disorder was the title of the Economics magazine. And this said that if the US pulls back from the international community, not anymore as the policeman of the world, and the US is not ready to work on a number of global issues, then everyone must step forward, including middling powers like Japan and Germany. Japan and Germany, and rising ones like India and Indonesia should step forward. So the economists say. Japan will be able to do a lot of contributions for the world because Japan is a harbinger of global issues. The Economist said that in the December 11th edition of 2021. Japan is a harbinger of various issues, including aging society, number of children reduced, and economic demise and geopolitical situation caught between China and the United States. But the world will be able to learn from this harbinger of global issues. What can we do? So I believe that we will be able to take initiatives for peace and disarmament, facilitation of wars, initiatives promote SDGs, and in particular environmental initiatives, because we have accumulated some experiences. Now, lastly, this is the Asahi Shimbun editorial in April 2022. I would like to introduce this because this editorial was published after our discussion. I discussed the issue with the writer, the journalist of the Asahi Shimbun, And he told me that he would write the editorial on this issue, and he did so. My argument was that as I mentioned, if the Security Council cannot function well, then the General Assembly can play a certain role. And it's not just the UN Security Council and General Assembly, but uh, there are other areas and humanitarian aid and so on that the UN will be able to do. And the Japan has got accumulated the expertise and experiences, good and bad. So we would be able to share some of our experiences with the rest of the world. And Japan might be able to play a fair mediator for global political issues as well, like the problem in Myanmar, problem in Sri Lanka. And I don't know how much we'll be able to do for the war in Ukraine, but we should try now that Japan is the is in the chair of the G7 summit, which is going to take place in a month's time in May in Hiroshima. So Gerhard, I stop here and I would like to get engaged with other people for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiyotaka, so very, very much. Maybe if you switch off the PowerPoints, then we can see each other.
Okay.
If you, or I can switch it. Yeah, that's fantastic. Then we can see each other while we talk. Great. This was a wonderful discussion. Thank you very, very much. Completely exceeded my expectation. It was such a broad overview of the big problems we face now. So to start, maybe one thing which was shocking for me is that, and I was very surprised, is that in the Japanese population, at least according to this research, opinion research, it seems that Japanese people are not supporting the UN. Is that a problem with the research, or this research is not so perfect? So maybe they didn't.
No, I
Yeah.
think that percentage, just around 40% or even less, has been consistent.
Oh, I
That
see.
over the years, the favorability has been low. Partly because of the fact that Japan wishing to become the permanent Security Council member, finds itself in a difficult situation without any hope of becoming a permanent member of the Security Council. And also, Japanese press writes about all the flaws and problems of the United Nations, particularly how the UN Security Council has failed in getting the resolution on grain, the vetoes and all that. And the press does not report good elements or good sort of activities of the UN.
So we need you. We need you to give many. I think you were president of but it was an international press club, I think. And also I received your newsletter, so you spread your message. So
right now, I would like to make the best use of our organization, Nippon.com.
Okay, yes.
We are one of the medias, Japanese media.
If there are other questions, Yasuhide maybe, or do you have question? mathematician's viewpoint.
Yes. Akasaka Sensei, thank you very much. I could know United Nations has many activities people do not know. But yes, I feel same problem about just Japanese journalist says a permanent security council. The system doesn't work. Yes, five nations is unlikely to agree for important issues. Then, yes, I had there are some attempt to just remove the very relevant countries like in the Ukraine wars. Russia should be, outside the decisions. But I don't think this kind of attempt will be, come true. But Akasaka-sen has good ideas to improve the situations.
I believe that the people have come to realize that the Security Council reform is really overdue. And there must be something. But to change the UN Charter will be an enormous problem, enormous challenge. It might take years, and we will not be able to do it quickly. Then, within the framework of the current constraints, there might be something that we will be able to do. That is what I believe the UN General Assembly should be given more roles to play. If the UN General Assembly agrees on the economic or military sanctions, they can do that. Although, in the case of the UN General Assembly resolution, that will not have any binding power. In the case of the UN Security Council, the resolution will be binding. But even the UN Security Council agrees on the military sanctions, Japan will not be able to send troops to any outside any area outside Japan. So that's the same as the resolution of the General Assembly. The UN General Assembly may be able to do a lot more if this UN Security Council cannot.
General Assembly means 193 countries have a right to vote.
Right.
Oh, yes.
This is a way. Yes, 193 countries are members of the UN, and they have one vote. Each one of them has one vote. And about 130 or 140 countries are on the side of the liberal democracies. If I may say so, they are on the side of the interests of the West. the European Union, United States, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and others. But right now, the countries like India and the Middle East, they are not that, say, democratic anymore. India might say that it's the largest democracy in the world, but as far as their voting attitudes are concerned in the United Nations, they are not taking firm actions against Russia. They abstain because they are buying weapons from Russia, right? They are somewhat quite linked, connected with Russian interest.
If I may,
Thank you.
yeah. If I may ask a question, this is about nuclear issues. Right at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that Japan is not party to the denuclearization agreement. This I didn't know. Why is this, and what does that mean?
Well, Japan is protected by American nuclear umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
We have the hostile neighbors,
Mm-hmm.
North Korea and China,
Mm-hmm.
both of them having nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
How can we become members of the treaty to ban nuclear weapons while China and North Korea keep their weapons and threaten with those weapons? Japan needs either this umbrella of nuclear from the United States, or Japan produces its own nuclear weapons. But you don't agree with that production of nuclear weapons by Japan itself. It's much more reasonable to work to be an ally with the United States. And so, US and other, say, countries with nuclear weapons like France, UK, China, Russia are not parties to this treaty.
Okay. I didn't know this, so thank you. That's interesting. Another thing which I wanted to ask you is there's the G7 coming up now. You mentioned this briefly. So what is your view on what this G7 is going to achieve, and what are the main aims for the G7 now? You mentioned in the connection with the war in Ukraine that there's some discussions coming up here.
I think that they would work on the solidifying the stance against Russia, agreeing on keeping economic sanctions against Russia, and the question of nuclear weapons too, calling Russia not to use military, even tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine. They may be able to get some, say, warning sign. If Russia uses the nuclear weapons, they would have to face terrible consequences. The Third World War may be ignited. And that's sort of a political agenda. And also economic sanctions and sanctions against North Korea. And the sort of symbolic declaration on nuclear weapons too.
Okay.
While they are not members of the treaty banning the nuclear weapons, they will say that they are in Hiroshima, no more Hiroshima, no more nuclear weapons. That sort of a symbolic message will come from G7.
Martin, do you have questions? Martin.
I was very impressed by your talk, and it was very interesting to hear. Questions, yes, any number, but I think
Do you think that Putin will be arrested in the end?
do I think so? I don't know. I mean, I was quite interested by your the way you viewed the world as being sort of liberal democracies and the rest to a sort of somewhere in dictatorship or something, and I think a lot of people no longer feel things are actually as simple as that, that within our own states where theoretically that's the way it is, there are times when we wonder whether strings are not being pulled in ways that are designed to move us to view things a certain way. And with this Ukraine war, I feel there's a huge element of that. And that isn't so much a question, it's more an opinion. So I don't know how can one phrase it? Do I think Mr. Putin will be arrested? I've no idea, because how can we tell how secure he is in Russia? I mean, you know, there are people in Russia very clearly who are not comfortable with what's going on. I'm sure that's the case. There are also people in Russia who aren't looking at, you know, what's been happening since, say, 2014, but are looking back to what happened in 1989 and 1990, when Gorbachev really went into détente and said, let's stop it. And at the time, I was just astonished at the way they put the boot into him. And at the same time, it kind of split what had been a big, powerful state, multi-ethnic state, certainly. It's almost a civil war, I feel, between what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. I mean, they were together for centuries, you know. I know, and indeed, for it to carry on, you know, the very name Ukraine means borderland, doesn't it? Whose borderland? It's the borderland for expanding Muscovy, which was reoccupying land which had originally been Rus, the Rus, the land of the Rus, but which had been destabilized and had lost its kind of heartlands around Kiev and so forth, not to anything Western, but to the Mongols under Genghis Khan, and had smashed that little system. You know, you look back historically and you think, these issues are so complicated. And I don't know how, so it seems to me, you know, would he be arrested? I mean, it's not going to be simple for him, and I'm sure he feels that too. He's riding a dragon, really, and he has been from the start. It's easier in a way to be a United States president because you've got a much clearer constitution within which to operate, whereas he's in a way in a state that's kind of recreating itself after a huge kind of dislocation. So the thing I did find interesting, and we've had, in a way, two international goes, if you like. Before the United States Nations, we had the League of Nations, which was created out of the First World War and an attempt to bring things back into, or back to actually create an order that would prevent that sort of thing happening again, and they put it in a neutral country, Switzerland. And within 20 years, they were back at it. And then in 1945, they had a second go, and they put it with one of the sort of emergent superpowers, effectively. And it's gone the distance of what, 70, 80 years, and possibly the most important things that, yeah, we're never going to, within the Security Council, it's a real balance of power the whole time. It must be, because the people in there are massively important in actually being the power brokers of the world. But all the other things that it's doing, that you were implementing, hearing all of that, one suddenly realizes, yes, that goes way beyond what the League of Nations, I think, was able to achieve, and it's done it for so much longer. Maybe that's something that is far more difficult to reverse, and in its way is actually perhaps creating more meaningful interactions between different peoples, irrespective of where their political masters at any particular moment feel they have to position themselves. Maybe that's the most important thing about it. And maybe from that point of view, activities by Japan, which, yeah, it's under an umbrella, but in many other ways, it's actually relatively non-aligned on a whole lot of issues, which allows it to have a sort of influence and a voice, I would have thought. And yeah, so it was very interesting to hear your talk. And I'd be very, can I ask you a personal question?
Yeah.
I've sort of hedged your question, but how did you get involved in that, or choose to get involved in the UN? You're obviously interested in a sort of international career, because after graduating, you took yourself out to Cambridge and you did a second degree in English, I guess. So that's a huge challenge for a start. And then beyond that, it could have taken you in any number of possible directions, I guess. But by choosing to involve yourself in this international organization, what sort of motivation did you have, and are you sort of satisfied with how?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. In 1988, I was working at the Japanese delegation to the international organizations in Geneva. Then I had a chance of becoming member of the Secretariat of the GATT, now WTO, World Trade Organization. And I was fascinated by the work of that international organization, WTO, at the GATT at the time. Beautiful working place, just along the Lake Geneva, and nice work-life balance, so to say. And I was so much fascinated by that international organization. I came back to Japan, to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I volunteered to work for any international organizations. I had another chance of going to WHO, World Health Organization, in Geneva again, another 4 years. And that was also interesting. And that's why later on I became one of the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, Organization for Economic Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris, 4 years. And that was the step before going to the United Nations. And talking about my own experience, I say that the UN or WHO they are huge international organizations. And the membership is so wide. The UN Charter does not ask you to be a liberal democracy. The word democracy is not there in the Charter. So some dictators, North Korea is a member, or China is also a member of the UN. Until recently, yes, as you said, that we thought that the world is moving towards liberal democracy, like Francis Fukuyama said at the end of history and the last man. And
Very
but now the people understand that the world is not facing the rivalry between democracies and the authoritarian states. There are a lot of countries now, they are called Global South, the developing countries which are neither democratic nor authoritarian, in the middle. And everyone is looking after its own interest. That's the world right now. And the number of democracies is outnumbered by non-democratic countries, according to some, say, standards set by the NGO. And so, if the world is having the same ideas about liberal democracy, the UN-like organizations will be able to work more effectively. But right now, there are a lot of dictators, authoritarian states, and non-democratic states, and the UN has got to find some compromise solution among them. Now, coming back to the question of the possibility of arresting Putin, I believe there is a possibility because there are two important precedents. One, Sudan's former president, Bashir. The arrest warrant was issued by the International Criminal Court. At that time, nobody believed that Bashir will be transferred to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Nobody, because he was visiting African countries, African summit. I mean, he didn't care about this, the arrest warrant of the ICC. But coup d'etat in Sudan ousted Bashir, and he was arrested. And he was arrested and brought before the internal court. And the new government agreed to transfer him to the International Criminal Court. Although that was 2 years ago, nearly 2 years ago, and the new government of Sudan has not yet transferred Bashir to Sudan, to ICC. But this is the first case, similar to the arrest warrant of Putin. Another one is Milosevic of former Yugoslavia. I mean, he was the big president of former Yugoslavia, sort of a dictator. He did not think that he would be arrested. But at last, in the end, he was arrested and he was brought before the court in The Hague for special tribunal on former Yugoslavia. And he died in prison. So there are certain possibility that Putin may be ousted by internal forces if he is arrested internally in Moscow. He may be transferred to The Hague or the court, or he may be visiting some ICC member states. He's visiting South Africa in August this year. South Africa, if they think seriously about the obligations under the ICC, South Africa must arrest him. But in the case of Bashir, South Africa did not arrest. So this time too, Putin may be visiting South Africa in August this year, and probably we cannot expect South Africa to arrest him. But if he visits other countries without much, preparation, he may be arrested. Former president of Peru, Fujimori, he went to Chile, actually, Santiago. He did not think that he would be arrested, but he was arrested and brought, in his case, brought back to his own country. But so there are certain cases that former presidents, or yes, if they become former president, they may be arrested. But we never know.
No.
We never know.
If he's ousted internally, then that would be whoever. If he was ousted internally, it would be very convenient for those who ousted him, probably.
Right.
Depending on their stance relative to this present question, I suppose.
Exactly.
I mean, there are people who are probably more extreme than he who would say this war needs to be further prosecuted. We can't let Ukraine go. There may be others who would say, oh, this has been a complete waste of time. And if they win, then probably they would either do that to Putin themselves or hand him over if it was more convenient to get someone else to do it, kind of thing. And I guess that in making the move that he's made over the past year of choosing to go to war in that way, he must have weighed up that risk, I imagine, because the chances were surely high, unless he did indeed totally misread the ease with which this was what he had in mind was going to be accomplished. And if he did, then people around him were probably feeding him the wrong sort of information. So yes, in that sense, I agree with you. There is the potential for it to happen would be that way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, and it's interesting to hear your perspective. And one thing is very interesting hearing what you were saying is that a lot of your interests come from actually working in, say, Geneva or in France. In other words, close actually to the places that were involved with the first round, as it were, the League of Nations and the European side, rather than the side on the other side of the Atlantic, as it were, to begin with. And I think the world is moving the way it is because of internal, well, because the direction in which we are moving or have been moving is becoming clearly untenable, that we are having to consider seriously what our activity is doing to the biosphere that we depend on, and we know that we're going to have to change our behavior. How can that be achieved fairly? How can it be achieved without huge losers? You know, that's something that many people are now, I suspect, thinking and feeling and wondering about. It's been so simple in, you know, when it was all we have to do is to carry on growing economies and spreading it and everything will be fine. And we see that actually growing economies has this appalling impact on our biosphere. And so we have to completely assess our stance towards what is viable as a way of life and so forth, and what, and the idea of we need to share limited resources rather than just carry on thinking we can all go on getting richer and richer. And that's a huge change of direction.
Okay.
This turned into a monologue, so I shall shut up. But it's been very interesting. The kind of talk that you gave stimulates one to think, and to try and sort of make sense of these complexities. So it's hugely valuable, and I'm grateful to have had the chance to listen to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Martin. Thank you so very, very much, Kiyotaka. This was a wonderful evening here for us in Tokyo, and I think in Europe it's the morning. Thank you so very, very much and I'm really looking forward to seeing you again at our dinner, our next dinner. Thank you so very, very much.
So thank you again, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
And let's hope we have more peace in the world.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.